Ladies and gentlemen, you may be wondering, who is the new king I'm referring to in the title of this video? Well, the answer is to be revealed in the first game, but before we get there, this is round 6 of the Tata Steel recap. This round's a little bit delayed as I had a lot of things going on in my own life to sort out, like writing a 6-hour-long blog post where you lose track of time. I guess it's like writer's unblock, yeah? But let's get into the game from the Tata Steel Challenges. You see, guys, we're mixing it up a bit. We're not starting with Magnus Carlsen or Tata Steel Masters, but we're getting straight into the Challenges event. And specifically, this game I'm showing you was played between Arjun Erigaisi as white, top seed of the tournament, playing against another top seed also from India, Grandmaster Erigaisi-Ganguly, who is playing with black. So which Indian player is going to be the one that's the new king? Let's find out. It was ED4. We had the Steinitz Sveshnikov attack with E5, hitting that knight. And now it's very important for black to play the next move. Not moving his knight from F6, because then we go CD4 and we just completely kill in the center. But D5, it's counter-attacking the bishop. Erigaisi plays bishop B5, knight E4, captures bishop to B6. And this position here, after knight C3 castles and bishop to E3, is one that's quite an important theoretical position, actually. You see, at this point, white has a very nice looking center, yeah? He's got the space advantage, central majority. But black has quite real counterplay with moves like, well, they've got the pressure from this piece on D4, right? The knight is also quite strong on the E4 square. And if black continues with the move of bishop to G4, then actually black's position is quite reasonable. Just pinning the knight to increase the pressure on this pawn. And this is something I did cover quite deeply, by the way, in my course, How to Beat E4, E5, where I analyze this position in a lot of detail for white. But anyway, the game goes F6, and this actually gives you a potential opportunity to improve on the way in which white played in the game. Because white ended up playing EF6 and didn't really get a lot out of the opening. But let's see if you can do better with white to play. And so, while you are thinking about that, you can definitely make sure to support this video by smashing that like button. What's the easiest way to improve your chess? Subscribing to the channel. Hit that red subscribe button. And tap that notification bell and click all so you get all my videos in your feed. Good or good. So here on move 11, the correct move is actually queen b3. And this is something, by the way, I do explain in my aforementioned course. I'll put a link in the description or as a pinned comment. Either works. And the point of queen b3 is that you're threatening this pawn and you're also threatening the knight on e4 with the pin, yeah? But if you play knight takes c3, we're not forced to go queen takes c3 and put our queen on pre. But instead, we can play bishop takes c6. And after takes and takes, what we see is that black has a horribly weak pawn structure, yeah? If you go bishop a6, I just take your c6 pawn for free. But otherwise, white gets castle, the knight will come to e5, and white is just completely dominating on a strategic level. Not least because the bishop on b6 is also pretty dumb in this position, right? Unfortunately, it appears that white had not studied my course, as I guess this is why he played the move e takes f6 instead. But okay, he's such a strong player that he still was able to get a reasonable position. I mean, rook f6 would seem the most normal to me. Just take back with the rook, try to get some counterplay here, like with bishop g4 or rook g6 sort of things. The black goes knight takes c3 instead. I guess the idea of his is that after b takes c3 and queen f6, well, he wants to be able to take with a queen without allowing the knight takes d5, and I suppose it is playable as well. After castles bishop g4, we actually transpose back into some more standard theory after bishop e2. But here we see one of the more subtle weaknesses of Ganguly's play, which is that sometimes he's a little bit too direct in handling certain positions, where sometimes you just build up the position more slowly. The rook on a8 is the one piece not doing anything, so it would make sense to go rook e8 and just, develop the pieces. And again, this transfer is a position I analyzed quite deeply, I believe, in my course. Or actually, it's not exactly the same, because in that, if white had plays h3, bishop h5, queen c2, that's a transition to the line that I cover. Of course, here white has some different options. For example, you could play queen c2 immediately. You could consider queen b3, even trying to attack this pawn, or a4. In general, white's a tiny bit better, but black still can play, of course. But bishop f3 is asking a little too much of the position somehow, where you're giving up the bishop pair, and it's not immediately obvious what you get for it. I mean, maybe knight e7 is the best of a bad bunch here, but after rook a8, I think that black's plan was maybe to go knight a5, knight c4, and try to get the bishop into place somehow. But it's a very slow plan, and Erigaisi plays bishop e2. Very nice move just to cover c4. Black goes knight a5, going for knight c4 himself. White goes a4, which is actually aimed against knight c4, which doesn't make sense now, and I think you probably see why, but in case it's not clear, white just takes and then just plays the move a5, Noah's Ark's trap. And if black goes bishop c5, trying to free the bishop with this pin, well, you got many moves here. Like, the simplest probably just queen here and take the pawn. Apparently queen b1 and going after this guy is even better, so yeah, black is just toast either way. So black goes c6, trying to prepare the idea of knight c4. A move like rook b1 would again be quite interesting, just putting a rook on open file, but bishop d3 is also a very decent move by white. The game continued. Actually, I have to say, bishop d3, I'm very surprised that black didn't play knight c4, because it definitely makes a lot more sense when white is using a second move to take, then it's not as effective. Probably if white goes bishop c1 and just kind of kicks a knight later, he's probably still better because of the bishop pair, but it's not that big of an advantage anymore when a knight can potentially reroute towards e4, for example, to get back in the game. You know, same with bishop a5 first, let's say. And, you know, this position, I think white's only a little bit better, probably. But instead we have bishop c7, which might not seem to make that big of a difference, but actually it does. For one thing, you have moves such as queen h5 available, trying to create a little weakening with the pawn g6 move, or a move like rook b1 in order to stop a knight c4 move, but white goes queen to g4 in the game. You know, not caring about this g6, as it were. But maybe you should care about it, because it does, you know, it would be somewhere you would be able to go h4, h5 and use it as a hook, potentially, down the line. So black goes rook d8. White plays rook a to e1. And at this point, black plays a move that is slightly curious to me in the move bishop to d8. And okay, if you play such a move, I'm sure it's to stop bishop to g5, but it's just such a passive move. To me, a move like h6 would seem a more natural way to cover this square. Now, maybe Ganguly was nervous about something like bishop g6 and the bishop coming in, but I think that you just go rook e6 and the bishop just has to go back again, right? So it's not like white really achieved anything from this sequence as such. So yeah, h6 I think is the right move. You know, maybe white would go g3 to try and stop black trading off the bishop pair. But in knight c4, and this is where you kind of wish your rook was on b1 to cover that. But since it's not, black is more or less just doing okay, with white only having a very small edge. But instead the game went bishop d8, and now white played the move g3, which granted is not the first line of the engine. Engine still likes the idea of trying to provoke a g6 weakening, but it's definitely quite thematic where you can go king g2 and just very slowly advance on the king side using your pawn majority. Again, knight c4 is probably the best move, and it does surprise me a little bit that black didn't play knight c4 at some point, because it's just simple, improve the worst place piece, right? But I guess maybe Ganguly had a little bit of an off day maybe in this game, because yeah, queen f3 probably has just not a very good move simply, because after queen to h3, well, he kind of almost forced white to play the move he wants to anyway. So again, a little bit too forcing somehow. G6 is played, bishop to e2. And it's actually a very annoying move, because queen e4, you've got bishop h6, and if queen f5, then white doesn't trade the queens, but instead plays bishop to g4, hitting the queen like this. Well done if you saw this idea. And after queen to f6, it turns out the tactics kind of just don't really work in black's favor. I mean, the move bishop d7 is one very nice idea where you force like rook e7, and then, you know, you're able to kind of invade with the rook and potentially the bishop and just be super, super annoying like this. White's moving again bishop f4 also keeps a winning position, and again, like h5, it's kind of like, okay, to be fair, black has kind of strategically lost whatever he does, but you are to some extent making white play move bishop d7. It's kind of a good move for him anyway, yeah. Black takes. Again, a little surprised he doesn't go knight c4, though I guess he was nervous about rook e6 in that case or something. Or computer points out a wacky bishop e8 idea to get at the weakness from behind. Not every day you see this idea. Game went king h7, rook e6 a very nice move, and we see that black is fatally weak on those light squares, and you know, rook d6 also is an incredibly creative maneuver. It's worth pointing out, by the way, that bishop c7 is not a winner here, because we have the intermezzo bishop e6, right? And then when the queen moves away, we just go rook d7 and, well, we win the queen or we win the bishop. You get the idea. So black goes queen e7, trying to keep pace with the bishop and the rook. But after bishop e6 again, how do you deal with rook d7? If you move the king out of the way, there's like bishop e5 and rook d7, and black is completely toast. The game ultimately ended rook f4, rook d7, and so white wins the queen, and the rest was just a simple mopping up process. Yeah, like bishop c8, trying to get in like this. Again, attacking the weaknesses from behind with the bishop. Rook d6, g4, just ripping open the king. I mean, at this point, white is just playing like a super GM. Of course, it's easier when you're completely winning, but still we give credit where it's due. So take, bishop e6, king g7, f4, so just to anchor the bishop in place, knight d2, f5, take, knight e4, and yeah, after queen h5, like white is just up a million pieces in material, or more precise, million points. King f6, queen e7, and yeah, we are going to collect the harvest very quickly, and so Ganguly resigned. And as a result of this win, Arjun Erigaisi went to 5.5 out of 6. That's 5 wins in a row. Oops, I lost count. 5 wins in a row in the Tata Steel Challengers. And he's 1.5 points ahead of the players on second place. And I forgot exactly which players are on second place. But okay, it's like you have the exhibition by Erigaisi and then the rest of you playing the tournament. As I once said about Fischer scoring 11 out of 11 in a US championship. So now that we've seen the challenges, just quick recap of the results in case people are wondering. The game Murison against Nguyen ended in a draw. It was a Moller bishop c5, or I think it's called Archangle, so technically the Archangle Squirrel Lopez. You also had a draw between Vogel against Jumabayev. Also Dada against Bier ended in a draw as well. And then Maurizi Lamy ended also in a draw. And the other 2 decisive games were both ones that were good for the local Dutch players. Lucas van Forest beating Polina Shuvalova in a long game that I can see was a Catalan with bishop b4. And then the other Dutch player, Max Warmerdam. I guess Owen Lamy is also Dutch in a tournament. But yeah, the Dutch champ Max Warmerdam won this game against Drugina in a quite sharp line of the g6 Rossolimo. Looks like it would be quite an interesting game, actually. It's just that, yeah, I only have a limited time to record this video because I've got like a call in an hour. So let's get you to show you just absolutely the most important bits. Starting with the game from the Tata Steel Masters. You see, we had a change of the guard in terms of the leaderboard. Because before this round, we had Mamedyarov, Vidit, and Richard Rapport in the lead on 3.5 out of 5. But then Rapport lost this game with black against Magnus Carlsen in a Catalan. I'm trying to play 2 moves in a row for white, but that would be cheating. Knight f6, c4, e6, g3. And because of Carlsen's win over Rapport, it allowed Carlsen to leapfrog Rapport to join the leaders on 4 out of 6. So Rapport plays dc4, bishop g2, knight c6. And here Carlsen decides to play in a little bit of an original way. Because normally the way that white should play, and this is something I wrote about very recently on my chess.com post. If you want to find out more about it, just put it in the comments and I can reply and give you the link. But I pointed out there that queen a4 is the main line. With the point being after bishop b4, black is trying to stop white getting the pawn back. But at the same time, white can take, he can eventually get this pawn back. Because, I mean, you've got moves like castles, you can go knight a3 and get at the pawn one way or the other, right? And these lines are thought to be a little bit better for white. Granted, with correct play, black can neutralize the advantage and slowly maintain the balance, but it's not the world's most pleasant task, let's put it like this. But obviously, Rapport was quite well prepared here, and Carlsen decided to test his opponent in the sideline of castles. And it might seem weird to call castles sideline, but it's because you're letting black go rook b8 and get in b5 to defend his extra pawn quite easily. So white is playing as a true pawn sack. Normally the way they played is like knight c3, b5, and something like either, e4 and d5 in the center, or more often something like knight e5. And saying that, okay, I, have this lead in development that kind of makes up for the fact that my structure is kind of wonky and black is up a pawn. And usually white ends up actually sacking a second pawn e5 to increase lead in development. It's one of these lines where if black knows what he's doing, it's fine, but it can be a little bit tricky. I remember when I was playing this in Blitz as a teenager that somehow my results weren't that good and sometimes I just got mated before I could castle. But objectively, it's nothing too special. Which is why Carlsen decided to play bishop e3, a kind of surprising move, I guess, just to get Rapport out of book and to ask him, okay, what are you going to do here? Because you see, if black plays a move like b5 now, well, you could argue there is some benefit to not having a knight on c3, right? That after, for example, a4, b4, well, the knight is not under attack anymore. And so moves like knight e5 and try and go for a similar structure, where the c4 pawn is kind of weak, could arguably be considered a somewhat better version for white compared to the other line. Now, okay, computer is claiming you just take knight d5 and you equalize, but yeah, giving back the pawn like this is certainly not the, let's say, most obvious thing to play in a practical game, right? So, in any case, b5 is actually probably a better move than I initially had thought. The move knight d5 is another move trying to kick the bishop, and probably Carlsen's idea was just to go bishop d2. And same with e4, you can kind of kick the knight away later, or even go queen c1 and take the pawn, which is actually what we see in the game, where black goes bishop d6. Maybe not the most precise move, but perhaps the Rapport was trying to find a natural move to get Carlsen out of book, and, well, he did succeed in doing so. Because here, Carlsen had quite a long think after this novelty. So, the best move for white might actually be just to play knight fd2. The idea is it allows you to take that pawn, but it stops b5 because you're attacking the knight now, which is quite important. Though, to be fair, even here, I mean, white probably has a very small edge. Black is quite solid, and he can try to harass the bishop and create some piece counterplay. But yeah, I think you have to give a small preference to white, at least. Instead, Carlsen goes queen c1, I guess playing in a similar spirit to some of the other lines where the knight was going to d5 or bishop e7 or something. And after b5, yeah, white goes b3, and you can really feel the influence of Daniel Dubov, a Carlsen long-time second of Magnus Carlsen, with moves like b3. Because Dubov also likes to play b3, it seems, in every random position in the Catalan as a sort of stylistic imprint on the line. Now, the best line for black is probably actually not to try to defend this pawn. Rapport played bishop b4 in the game, but I find Castle's a little more precise. So after take, if white takes the pawn back right away, well, black goes knight b4, and I mean, you've got bishop a6, and black gets very good piece play, and I think it's definitely not worse in this kind of position. But instead we had bishop b7 in the game, which I consider to be a little bit less precise. For one thing, because white now has extra options, like playing knight to a3, for example, and trying to get the pawn that way. The computer thinks it's still about equal anyway, if black just, jettisons the pawn to develop. But after queen c4, this is what happened in the game. Black played knight to b4, which is probably the right idea, but maybe castling first is a tad more precise. Just kind of wait and see what white does and then kind of make your move. But okay, knight b4 was played in the game. And yeah, now one small difference, which it doesn't really affect the assessment of the position, but you do have the move a3. And bishop a6 doesn't really make a lot of sense anymore when the knight is sort of under fire, right? Like if bishop a6 is played now, well, you just go queen c1. It's kind of like, well, if the knight moves, you have a queen c6 fork. So it's a good example of how Sam's trying too hard to make a counter-attack when your piece is under attack for the sake of it. Well, if you don't have a good follow-up after you move out of threat, it's probably not a good idea, right? So black goes knight db5, so accepts that his play was maybe marginally imprecise, that if you go bishop d2 to try to go this way, maybe you're a tad better. But Carlsen goes bishop g5 instead. And it's a common principle in the Catalan that you don't really mind giving up your bishop for a knight if you're able to kind of keep a grip over the c5 square. It turns out, however, that black is able to get in the c5 break, so it does mean that black is objectively equal and that maybe Carlsen's play was not absolutely perfect. But what makes Carlsen the best player is not that he sort of finds these amazing top engine moves all the time, but he just very rarely makes a move that's not in the top 3 engine moves. He's got that great consistency in the quality of his play. So he plays the move queen a4, a little bit of an annoying move in an equal position. You're asking some questions like how are you going to defend the pawn and forcing Rapport to be able to answer a multiple choice question test correctly. Which, to his first one he gets right, he goes c5, realizing it's more important to attack the center and activate the position for his bishop pair to open it up than is to, try to keep the pawn alive. But the thing is, if you play some passive move like a6, for example, white gets time for knight b3 and some knight c5 or, knight a5, c6, and white, stops the c5 push and has a very pleasant positional advantage. So that's why it's very important to go c5. And of course, when you say A, you should generally say B, as the Russian saying goes. So queen takes a7. Black goes for an opposite card bishop position with bishop to f3. Actually, the best move here is probably bishop d5. Just play for long-term compensation and keep that bishop pair alive. But okay, it's not the easiest decision to make in a game to really trust in your long-term compensation like this. So Rapport goes for a more forcing approach with bishop f3. And after... Actually, knight f3 is kind of interesting here to try to keep this pawn defended. But because if rook a8, queen b7 is kind of nice, you know, that you're able to, you know, in some lines take back, or at least push your a pawn down the board. Say with cd4, queen b3, just making sure his pawn's defended. And, well, the imbalance in the structure does give white some small hopes for an advantage, even if objectively black should be able to hold, like, queen b8 or something like this. Because the more pieces get traded, the more likely black can hold with opposite colored bishop's fortress, as it were. But anyway, again with bishop f3, keeping a little more fight in the position, cd4. Though it has to be said that probably objectively black is just fine, and after rook a2, this is kind of a very typical Carlsen move, right? Because it's like, you have to find exactly the right move here as black, or you're just significantly worse. So even though rook a1 is not the top line of the engine, at a practical level, it's very difficult for black to deal with. And in the game, black didn't manage to find a key move. I actually set this one as a little bit of a puzzle for the for people who follow my Facebook page, because it's quite a difficult example. So I want to show, you know, that if you think you know everything at chess, well, probably it means you know nothing, really. But okay, the answer here is not the move queen e7 that was played in the game. And it's also not the move e5, by the way, because, yeah, you defend the pawn. But after a moves like a4, even, let's say, knight e4 and then a4, this is just... It's very hard for black to stop the a-pawn, right, when the bishop is guarding the promotion square. So black definitely has some real problems in a line like rook's knight f6 and... Well, there's no need to take f6 and help black activate his queen. We can play rook c6, let them take us, and just have the much better bishop, much better passed pawn, and... Okay, it doesn't win the game by itself, but it gives you pretty decent chances, right? The game instead saw queen to e7, and this is a move that kind of is natural, but just kind of doesn't really work after a4. It's just very, very hard for black to stop this pawn marching. You know, if black goes e5, you can play like knight e4, or you could play a5, which is probably even better. And yeah, they go f5 and e4, but it's kind of like, so what? I just go bishop c6. I just keep pushing my pawn, knight in, and, you know, white is just completely dominating in this kind of position as white just gets the pawn closer and closer to queening, right? And Indian Indian gives white a very big advantage here. Still, this is probably better than what happened in the game, as after rook fd8, white showed that it was just a bluff by black. You can take the pawn for free, and black just has nothing. Actually, I forgot to mention the best move for black here in this critical position. So, well done if you recognize that knight e5 is the key. The first point is that queen d4 is actually not a real threat now, because you have this very beautiful move of bishop takes a3, which is the whole point of the play, and probably the move that both the players had overlooked in the game. You know, after take, obviously, you know, rook takes a3, rook d2 is just equal, and if the bishops stay on the board, it's also an ironclad draw. So, yeah, this is the way in which black would neutralize white's pressure. Granted, I think Carlsen would probably have played a little bit differently, maybe bishop e4 or something. But here as well, black has resources. Computer, among many playable moves, points out a very beautiful idea of d3, with a point that if white were to take that pawn, say, if you go ef3, d3 there's f5, and black gets back the pawn that way. Or if you go bishop takes instead, well then you're not covering the a8 square of the bishop anymore, right? So black goes rook a8, regains the pawn, and it's just completely dead equal after something like this, for example. So, yeah, basically that's how black could have maintained the balance with knight e5. It's not maybe, yeah, you have to obviously see some slightly difficult tactics, but then, you know, it makes sense now, right? But yeah, after rook e7, queen 7, a4, rook fd8, queen d4, black was basically just lost at this point. Rook b4, queen c3, and there was no real good way to stop the advance of the pawn, ultimately. Because even if black does stop the advance, you're tying up so many pieces to cover the pawn, yeah? Queen e3, just pinning the knight. Okay, you're not threatening a take yet, of course, because the rook is on pre, but after rook cc2, the rook is defended, and black finds himself in a little bit of a straitjacket. You know, if you play knight c8, like, I can even just take and, you know, remove the defender and win a piece based on some tactics. Or simply take, rook c7, you know, would also be winning. Well, black goes bishop g5, hoping for some tricks. Queen c5, though, hits the rook. and also keeps an attack on the knight. Bishop e7, a b6 is a very nice little tactic, as after queen takes a2, queen e7, we see that both the rooks are under attack, so queen c2, queen takes d8, king h7, b7, and there's no good defense to b8 equals queen, so for that reason, black just resigned here. So a very nice game by Carlsen, very, very convincing, and I had a great deal of fun actually showing you this game and showing how Carlsen managed to make a top 10 GM look honestly a little bit weak in this game. But seeing Carlsen makes it look easy, you know, if you played Rapport, it would be a little bit of a different story, most likely. So there were some other games that were played in this Tata Steel Masters as well. Only 2 more of the games in the tournament ended in wins, however. The game between Vidit against Duda ended in a draw in a semi-Tarash that I didn't analyze the game, but it looked like it was fairly balanced most of the way through. The next game between Mamedrav against Grandelius was also a draw. Mamedrav kind of struggled a little bit out of the opening after a quite interesting idea by Niels, and, well, in the end, both players were happy to draw the game. There was also a draw between Dubov and Esipenko. This was a Catalan where it seemed like black was just doing fine out of the opening. It was a little bit worse later, but defended well to hold the draw. And now we start to get to the action with some decisive games, as it were. So this decisive game here was played between Caruana and Giri. And, you know, it's definitely one of the games of the round because there was a game that definitely went back and forth a lot. Now, of course, Giri is a very well-prepared player and Caruana knew this, so he decided not to play his usual main lines with e4 or d4, but to go b3 and has played his delayed Nimzo Larsen. The idea of this move order, by the way, by white is that by playing knight f3 and then b3, you avoid things like 1 b3 e5, for example. But you're also committed to knight f3. Though, to be fair, you normally play knight f3 and Nimzo Larsen anyway, true or true. So after g3, we see white's playing very solid double fianchetto. h6 is just making sure there's no knight h4 to harass the bishop. It's a very normal move in these reverse Londons. Castles, bishop e7, d3. That's all very normal. Castles, knight bd2, and I know from my own experience that these positions can be a little bit tricky for black to handle if he doesn't know what he is doing. Because white is this very straightforward plan of playing rook e1 and e4. Which, by the way, is what happened in the game. Bishop h7, e4, knight d7. And so, you know, if you are struggling against the London, where if you're, let's say, you're a King's Indian player as black and you don't really like London, you can actually go for exactly the same setup with colors reversed. It actually works really, really well. You know, and sometimes you might go knight e5 and then prepare e4, depending on their move order. But yeah, after queen e2, position is ultimately about equal. But definitely quite a fighting position with a long strategic battle ahead, let's put it like this. Now, the idea of Giri's queen b6 is that he wants to go for a move like a4 and b5 and try to show that the white queen side could be a little bit weak. And a4 is, I think, a very intelligent strategic decision by Caruana. Yeah, on the one hand, maybe bishop b4 looks a little bit annoying at some moment. It's not what was played in the game, but the idea is to try to provoke some weakening moves like c3 or provoke e5 to activate the bishop. However, a4 also keeps the queenside pawns in track because it'll take some time for black to get in b5. And even when he does, I mean, it's a slight, you know, concession in black structure in theory, even if in practice it doesn't usually turn out that way. So black goes rook fc8. He just wants to, you know, try to prepare something like this one of these days. Caruana plays rook ac1, which is not the top line of the engine. Engine had some very weird idea of playing h4 and, I don't know, doing this kind of weird thing, but it strikes me as a little bit odd of a move at this exact point. Even though after e5 knight here, it does sort of come from mag to pawn storm on the king side. But anyway, the game went rook ac1. Slightly curious move, but not outright bad. Bishop c5. And now Caruana played the move e5. And e5 is a move that might seem like a very obvious move to attack the knight. But it's a very strategically double-edged decision to do this, because you're also freeing this h7 bishop, which, by the way, is a very good defender of the king compared to a normal King's Indian attack where the bishop might be on b7 instead by comparison. So it's a case where, you know, neither side has the ideal position, but at least on the king side, black can be pretty confident he's not going to get mated in general. But maybe he was a little bit too confident, because, you know, Giri, you know, he likes to make these slightly cocky tweets on Twitter, and, well, you know, it's one thing to make the tweets, but you also got to back it up in the game. So let's see if he was able to do so. So we had knight to f1, just maneuvering the knight to a better square. Makes sense. Black goes queen to d8. I guess he put a queen on d8 because he wanted to use the queen to defend the king. The more ambitious approach, go queen a6 and prepare b5 that way. Try to get like in some knight b6, a4 and open it up in that sense. But maybe Giri was a bit nervous about something like g4, that maybe White would use the h6 pawn as a hook to try to open it up on the king side for the knight. And so queen d8 does at least cover this possibility. White goes knight e3, continuing to maneuver, knight c7. So neither side's knights are on perfect squares, but it's not terrible either. One approach that would be kind of interesting for White would be to play a move like d4, actually. The idea of d4 being that, yeah, you make this bishop look very strong, and if Black, let's say, had the pawn on c5 already, this would be a very bad idea by White. But it is actually kind of interesting to go c4 and try to grab some space like this. You know, if they can't really go c5 in time when you got cd5, right? Now, the disadvantage is you are giving knight a6, you are giving a hole on b4. But you can also almost say, like, so what? Like, what's the big deal? I can play, like, you know, a move such as rook to a1, for instance, or even h4 here. If you go queen b6, I just defend this pawn. If you go knight b4, I cover the knight d3 threat. And, you know, it's a position. White's got some weaknesses, but also got some attacking ideas. And, well, they're a chance for both sides, right? Instead, Caruana plays king h1. And, well, his patient play does get rewarded, but not because of this move itself. Because after b5, it kind of becomes like, what's the point of king h1, you know? If you play a b5, cb5, I mean, you're just giving Black a4 and the queen side just being open in Black's favor, right? Because this is where he has more space and better pieces. So Caruana goes knight d4, trying to go after the soft c6 pawn, or what I like to call the soft underbelly. And I guess this might have maybe thrown Giri off a little bit in some point. Well, he played ba4, which is fine, because it's like, if White does go knight c6, you sort of say, so what? After ba4, you know, Black can play even just knight b6. Good to know that my thoughts are matching stockfishes, and yeah, you take the pawn and you basically just win on the queen side because you got a passed pawn. And you just saw the game Carlsen-Rapport, so you know the power of outside pass a pawns in the middle game already. But slightly more serious note, a4 is a move that was played. Black did indeed go knight b6. Okay, computer says knight a6 is more precise, but I mean knight b6, of course, it can't be a bad move in a sense, because this is just a transposition, and in the game after rook a1, knight a6, so, you know, Giri comes up with the right idea on the second attempt. Knight b3, bishop e7 is played. Actually, bishop e7 might be a little bit too, sort of passive here. I mean, there's nothing terribly wrong with a retreat. It's just very interesting to play a move like bishop takes e3, which, at first glance, might seem very anti-positional after queen e3, that the dark squares might look weak. But after c5, it's very hard to find a good way out of c4. You know, if you play a move like knight a5 trying to grab a pawn, for example, Black go knight b4 and just hit the knight and hit this as well. And if you play some other move, I know what you play, queen d2 maybe, Black just goes c4 and is just, you know, throwing everything at those light squares, and we see the power of that bishop from afar attacking the queen side. Such I think Black is just substantially better at this point. Because if you have to play some move like, well, some passive move defending this pawn like bishop f1, that's obviously a sign that things have gone very wrong for White here. Yes or yes. Well, Black goes bishop e7. I think that the players were saying it just a little bit lower in time around this point. Apparently the move knight c5 is really good, or even the move c5 actually is still pretty decent, in fact. Maybe this is even better, in fact. But yeah, instead Black goes queen d7, and as a result, he's not really solving the problem of this offside knight. And I guess that Giri maybe just missed Caruana's trick here, where if it wasn't for this next move, Black would just be much better, just c5, queen take the pawn, win the game sort of thing. But here, a very nice move, f5, is suddenly available. And the point of this pawn sack is that after e takes f5 and queen f3, it's actually really hard to avoid this attack with bishop h3. And, you know, it turns out the queen is actually almost badly placed on d7, because then you're going to have some discovered attacks in some lines. It's a very subtle point, but quite an important one. In the game, Black played knight c5, and, well, this will help me to kind of explain the idea a little bit more as it happened in the game with take. Caruana played a move d4. Apparently, it's actually better to play it as a pawn sack with bishop to h3, saying that, okay, I was just enjoying this really beautiful smoothie my wife made, and I totally forgot what we were talking about here. But I remember after bishop h3 that, well, Black has to take, right? Because if you play g6 in this position, we'll kind of see something similar in the game, but basically g4 ends up being really, really strong. And, you know, your knight can come in. Like, black can't take because you... I'm actually not sure which way to take is better. Like, bishop g4 wins the exchange, but knight g4, and this is probably even stronger again, right? Just absolute murder. So after bishop h3, black would have to take, and I think what maybe the players, especially Caruana, may underestimated, is that, you know, this bishop is actually much better for white, even though you're a pawn down. Because let's say I go c5, I mean, you've got e6 to kind of rip open up the position for the bishops. If rook a b8, you can play with bishop c3 and try to grab a pawn, which is probably the best move. But, you know, even moves like bishop d4 and e6 are also quite tempting, just opening up for the bishops that way. Because here black can go c5, like, it doesn't equalize, but you can try to get some sort of play, I suppose. But yeah, the move d4 was played, and after d4, well, black should probably go bishop b4 just to kind of provoke c3. It might seem like a very, very subtle point, but on the other hand, you're also kind of shutting in this bishop, so then when e6 is played in some lines, like, you're not, the bishop is going to be kind of stuck. But okay, it doesn't make a biggest difference to whether you go to b4 or back to f8 directly. The move in the game, bishop b7, is a little bit imprecise, I think. As after bishop to h3, I believe that you kind of have to let go of this pawn. It's like, you know, what would be a good metaphor? You know, it's like, you know, when you're in a kind of relationship with, you know, well, most of you guys who are watching as a, you know, male chess player, so I'm just going to say girlfriend. Like, you know, like in a relationship with your girlfriend, but it's kind of like just not working, but you kind of don't want to admit it's not working. But it's like the longer you're in this bad relationship, like the worse it kind of is for you. It's kind of like you just got to let go of this f5 pawn if you're black and play some move like, I don't know, knight c4, attack the bishop, and you know, you can play knight f5, but you just slide away with king to h8. And you don't care if they grab an exchange because apparently you get really, really good compensation because the light squares are kind of danger levels here. Also a nice point that, yeah, bishop a3, yeah, you can kind of get in this way, get in this way. You know, what's white going to do on the light squares other than, you know, beg for forgiveness or beg not to be murdered or something. Okay, it's an exaggeration, it's probably equal, but this is the way I think the black should play it. You know, white could keep the pressure with bishop c1, but it's not like winning or anything for white. But black went g6 instead, you know, hanging on to the bad relationship, and after g4, this is what happens. Black goes for f4, because as we saw before, taking on g4 is kind of committing suicide with your own sword. But after f4, white doesn't take this pawn, because then g5 or bishop g5, and black at least stabilizes to some small degree. But Fat Fritz decides to feast on black's pieces and play g5. Okay, I just realized you might have thought I was calling Caruana Fat Fritz, but Fat Fritz is his name, this engine that, you know, basically stole Stockfish's code and then claimed to be a separate engine. It's a fun little scandal. Maybe I'll do a YouTube video on it at some point. But for now, we focus on chess improvement content. So after queen a7, this is where we have the critical position of the game. Where if you find the right move here, you are basically winning. And if you don't find the right move, then it's going to be kind of bad. Well, actually, to be fair, white has more than one move that's good, but congratulations if you resisted that temptation to take that rook. I know some of you are itching like, I want the material. Money, money, money. Show me the money. But actually, it's more important to keep the control. Because after bishop c8, fe3, it's suddenly not so clear anymore. I mean, if black gets in bishop g5, like that pawn is kind of a little bit of a bone in your throat. You know, knight c4, and I mean, what's white doing here? So instead of playing bishop c8, what should we do instead? Now, you get partial marks if you played the move e6 trying to get in this way. That would be a pretty cool idea, but there is an even better move than, you know, playing in the Morphy style and saying, oh, 3 piece on pre is not enough, let's put a 4th one on pre as well. There is also the move queen f4 that's kind of obvious, but it's not the best move because then bishop g5 comes with tempo, and okay, you're still much, much better. Like knight g4 and the dark squares are just, you know, looking like Swiss cheese around this point once you trade off the bishop. Or if they do play bishop e3, then yeah, now you do have the time or to afford to take the rook, and, you know, black is not really getting enough compensation because his king is probably just as weak as yours around this point. Like g5, queen a3 is kind of a, I guess, an important point to attack this pawn before they start to establish control. You know, you also have like king g7, bishop a3, and it's complex. Like, engine sort of ideas, but somehow this just works out for white, and black's not in time to get the kind of blockade, as it were, on the light squares. Or even if he does, it doesn't really mean that much when his king is too weak. But the best move here is actually to move knight g4. And, you know, when I shared this position as a puzzle to a few of my Facebook friends on my post, some of them did actually find this move. And, you know, I gave him a little clap to congratulate him. You know, virtual clap, as it were. And if black goes h takes g5, saying, well, I've got this beautiful, what is it, the trapezium pawn structure. But unfortunately, it's kind of a bad landing, because after bishop a3, we kill the bishop. We go knight f6, and basically when a knight gets f6, you take, and black just gets killed. At least according to the computer. I know that from a human perspective, there might be some questions like, well, what if black goes king h8 and just kind of turtles with, I don't know, some knight f6 and rook g8 and saying, oh, you think you can sack? I can sack too. But we don't have to give up our beautiful seat on f6 for, you know, a little tower on g8. We can just play rook g1 or queen g2 and just take, and we get our material back that way. We still keep the monster knight on f6, and black is complete cactus with a bishop on h7. It is completely, utterly useless at this point. Now, if you go bishop g5 instead, white will just play the deadly quiet move, bishop c1. Got to keep an eye out for those retreats, right? We take f4, we kill the bishop, and yeah. Or maybe I'm saying kill too many times, but I know, you know, for the kids watching, it's like, maybe they haven't learned of the word of capturing the opponent's piece, as it were. Anyway, after bishop c8, this is what happened in the game. And Caruana thought he was being very clever with e6. And in some ways he was, because he's kind of worse if he doesn't play this. But also, Giri is kind of out of the woods now. Like, if you go into an endgame, for example, like, it's not really any better for white. Because black's got 2 pawns for the exchange, yeah? And also the knight's coming in, and, you know, it's not so easy. So white goes bishop d7 instead, trying to get this in. But this is kind of, yeah, stretching a little bit too far. It's kind of like, you know, when you sort of like make a bad investment and you sort of try to throw in good money after bad, but it just makes it worse and worse. It's kind of like what white's doing here. Like, you have to accept that you're just not better anymore and try to hold the balance. Whereas here, yeah, you're just kind of getting killed by this pawn in your throat. And, you know, the bishops are just kind of useless at this point because they don't have anything to target. Game went bishop a3, knight c4, and there's a little bit of a weird thing that happened later in this game that you'll definitely want to check out. Bishop c5, queen g7, keeping the control. I mean, I think black is just totally winning, but kind of the way the game continued on just for time trial is kind of funny. Well, funny maybe is not the right word, because it wasn't very funny for Caruana, but yeah, it was sort of a curious part of the game. Now, computer says knight d2, knight g4, knight f2, and yeah, just do the, you know, the W with the knight. You know, you can see the nice little drawing here. But, okay. But, of course, we could forgive Giri for not trying to play the bishop versus knight checkmate themes in a crazy time scramble in a middle game. Even though it would kind of fit his personality a little bit to toy with the opponent like this. But, seriously, though, bishop f6 is a move he played. And, yeah, it does kind of let white back in the game, in fact. You know, rook b1, and suddenly, you know, there is some counterplay. Because, yeah, you're attacking the pawn, but it's like, you're not really threatening anything, yeah? Maybe what Giri might not have appreciated at the time is that white has this move bishop f5 now. So it's move 39, it's very close to time control. And maybe the original idea of Giri was to take, and maybe take the pawn on d4. And maybe he just thought that this was just winning on material. The problem is that white has this very beautiful move here. Well, okay, technically you can take and then play rook b7, but actually reversing the move order with rook b7 is even better. I think that Giri caught this in time or he would have played this, but yeah, this trick just turns the table such that if black does take the rook, we take, and black just dies after king g8, queen g6, king f8, and yeah, bishop c5, and actually even have forced mate, queen e7, and rook f1, as it were. Beautiful pin. But okay, Giri course corrected in time. He played, actually after bishop f5, f5, you could still maybe go queen f7 or rook e8 and play it that way, but Giri went for rook to e8, and this is where the game went on a crazy turn again. Because apparently if you find the move queen h5 and just kind of go rook f1 and kind of play on the king's side, apparently it's 0-0-0 according to the computer. Why exactly, I don't know, and I'm not going to spend 15 minutes to figure it out here. But what Caruana is, he completely self-destructed, playing a rather tragic move of rook to b6. And maybe you see what is wrong with this move. it's black can just take the rook with the backward knight move. You know, those backward knight moves are hard to see, as Giri said in a press conference afterwards. But it's even worse in losing the exchange because you're also losing d4 now. Because you haven't got rook b1 from there to, you know, have the quantum rook jump over the bishop or something like this. We're playing a different game here. Game ended bishop a5, bishop to c3. Adrian wants rook f8, but by this point everything wins. Take, king g2. Hoping that for some reason black falls asleep at the wheel and allows some perpetual check, but of course it's not going to happen. Queen d2, king f1. King to g7 might look a bit weird, but it does stop a lot of the checks. And after queen d7, king f6, well, you can't take the rook yet because queen f2 is checkmate. So queen d6 is played. King f8, yeah, this is the Giri we know, do the crazy king march to rub salt in the opponent's wounds. Queen d7, rook to e6. Queen h7. So yeah, look at this beautiful king march to g4. And white just doesn't have a sensible check. After queen f7, rook to e4, there's just no good defense to the move rook to f4. And for this reason, Giri just resigned. I suppose maybe it would have been worth a punt to play queen dh7 and hope that black blunders king f3 and, queen h3. Actually, even then it's still winning. But yeah, king h4 is obviously the much cleaner way to put the game to an end. So yeah, that was how Giri beat Caruana. But as you can see, Caruana was actually winning at some point, and then he unfortunately messed it up and, blundered when he was kind of close to a draw, in fact. So yeah, really wild game. And okay, I don't really have time to show you the other decisive game, unfortunately, between Kayakin and Van Foreest. It was a game that was basically where Van Foreest actually used some preparation left over from the Nepo Carlsen World Championship match with putting this bishop on b8. But somehow the bishop never really quite got out from b8, which I think was what is meant to be the point of this line. That, at some moment you go knight to e7 and you go c6 and your bishop gets freed. But somehow black just didn't really get around to it in time. Like after c4, knight g6. I'm not going to seriously analyze this game, but just to give you a picture. White's a little bit better. Well, maybe more than a little bit better. He's probably actually quite a lot better with this sort of space. But yeah, in the end, Kayakin ended up winning this very long battle. Like later he played d5 and ended up being a very closed and long-winded battle where, Kayakin won a long endgame. But yeah, we're kind of out of time to sort of cover it, as it were. And then the final game, Shankland-Pragnananda ended in a draw in Sveshnikov, where Prague was just very well prepared and ended up getting a draw pretty much as soon as Shankland was kind of out of book. So yeah, that was basically the recap for round 6. So just to remind you of the standings, in the Masters, the leaders are Carlsen, Vidit, and I believe Mamedyarov is the other player. I'm having a mental blank at the moment. Yeah, it is indeed Mamedyarov who's the other player on 4 out of 6, with, some players naturally on 3.5 and so on and so forth still in contention. And in the challenges, Arjun Erigaisi is running away with it so far with 5.5 out of 6, 1.5 points ahead of a pack of players on 4 out of 6. So I look forward to also reporting on round 7 and tomorrow. Do let me know as well in the comments below what was your favourite game, and, well, congrats on completing the video as well. This one's a little bit shorter out of necessity, but still we got a lot of good value, saw some really great games. In any case, guys, I'll see you in the next video. Take care.